Canadians are struggling to find a home. This includes the brave men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces. This is why I pointed out on April 10th to the government that its new defence policy for Canada, entitled Our North Strong and Free, is just the latest in a long list of Liberal smoke and mirrors. I don't think it's a coincidence that this policy rightfully abbreviates into NSF, which Canadians increasingly know of late also means non-sufficient funds. And that's because this pretend policy starts out with insufficient funds. In fact, it provides $0 in 2024. There will be nothing for tactical helicopters, nothing for maritime sensors, and nothing for badly needed military housing. And on this latter item, Madam Speaker, perhaps it's just the Liberal way of making sure our military doesn't feel left out from the very same experience that many Canadians are struggling with, which is the inability to find a home, all under this government's watch. Madam Speaker, if that's not enough for this farcical defence policy, it is spread out over 20 years, 2 decades. And I hope Canada doesn't need any defending during this period. I just don't get it, Madam Speaker. Don't they care? We have CAF members who are having to line up at food banks to ensure they don't go hungry. We have CAF members who are having to go and sleep in tents because they can't afford rent. These should be red flags. But instead, the Liberals continue to bury their head in the sand and are providing literally nothing for military housing while we're in the midst of a very real housing crisis. Madam Speaker, in my initial question, I asked if the Prime Minister is aware that this government's facade policy will keep CAF personnel and their family in tents for years. And I hope the Parliamentary Secretary can provide some insight this evening on the rationale for why the Prime Minister has allocated $0 for military housing in 2024 and in 2025. Because the Minister of National Defence's response to my question was ludicrous. Madam Speaker, the Minister of National Defence had the audacity to offer sending me a copy of the new defence policy because he was concerned I may not have read it. Madam Speaker, I wonder if the Minister has. And I'm happy to personally chip in if he needs a new pair of reading glasses, because it's clear he has trouble seeing the funding table on page 30 that clearly shows $0 for military housing. He classified the policy with a straight face as, quote, a historic investment in new capabilities, end quote. Well, Madam Speaker, it's historic, all right. It's historic that any government in the midst of a housing crisis would allocate a historic $0 for 2 years while we have men and women sleeping in tents. Madam Speaker, and just in case the Parliamentary Secretary hasn't had a chance, like the Minister, to read the policy, I'd like to tell him more about the historic investments. $0 for maintaining national defense infrastructure, $0 for civilian capacity, $0 for housing in 2024 and 2025, $0 for tactical helicopters, $0 for satellite communications, $0 for enhancing our long-range missile capabilities, $0 for maritime sensors, $0 for airborne early warning aircraft, $0 for satellite ground station this year and next year, $0 for northern operational support hubs. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask the Parliamentary Secretary to explain to me, and more importantly, explain to Canadians, how she can invest in anything with $0. Thank you, Madam Speaker.